Welcome to Red Hat Summit and to the Open Source Knowledge Share booth. Today we're bringing together members from two Red Hat supported upstream projects that are dedicated to sharing open source principles and open best practices. Our discussion today brings together members of the Open Organization Project and the Open Source Way project, and we'll tell you a little bit more about those projects as we go along. I'm Bryan Behrenshausen, Community Architect in the Open Source Program Office at Red Hat. And leading the discussion with me today is Karsten Wade, also a Community Architect in the Open Source Program Office at Red Hat. Hi, Karsten.
Hi, Bryan. Thanks.
Yep. Why don't you get us started?
Okay, sure. Yeah, let's just go ahead and get going. So a lot of us benefit from open source knowledge sharing in terms of the documentation that we come across in the world, the kinds of release notes and marketing materials a project might put out, as well as the kinds of materials that we talk about at this booth here, the open practices and the knowledge sharing around open organizations. So one of the questions that I'm curious is when someone wants to step across the line and go from reading, from being a consumer of this, to joining a project and actually participating in it. What would be some of the reasons that you would think that someone that would come to mind for you for why someone would join an open source knowledge sharing project? If anybody wants to just jump on in, feel free.
I'll go ahead and virtually raise my hand. Hi, everyone. Leslie Hawthorne. I am a manager of vertical community strategy in Red Hat's open source program office and a contributor to the Open Source Way guidebook. So my motivation for joining in the discussion around contributing to the Open Source Way was actually that I wanted to be able to take advice and guidance that I had given to people repeatedly over and over again in one-on-one mentorship sessions, in public talks, et cetera, and actually get it written down so that it was a referenceable work. So when I was time constrained or otherwise didn't have the opportunity to share my knowledge with someone one-to-one, I could point them to the guidebook and say, this is absolutely what I would have told you during our phone call. Please enjoy it. And if you have any questions after that, please get in touch with me.
Hey, Rebecca Fernandez from Red Hat. I work on our open culture programs and contributor to both opensource.com, which is another knowledge sharing community, and also the Open Organization Ambassadors, which started out there and now has moved into its own space. And so I would say for me, a really big reason and motivator that I see is you will see people out there sharing things in a community that are kind of like what you do and sharing experiences that are kind of like what you know, only you realize you have some piece of knowledge or some piece of the story that they don't have yet. And so for a lot of folks, I think that's really the impetus that pushes you from consumer of information to wanting to contribute to that knowledge base. And that continues once you become a contributor. You really kind of get plugged into what other people are doing, and things that you thought were just unique to your experience turn out to be more universal than you might have imagined. And things that you thought were universal turn out to be just unique, your own local problems. And so you really get a lot. That flow back and forth of sharing and information is really rewarding.
I'm going to jump on that as well. So hi, everybody. I'm Jen Kelchner. I'm founder of Leader 21 and an Open Org ambassador and contributor as well. I love what Rebecca said, because I think for me, it has been that sharpening that you get in a community, that when you start having conversations, whether you're reading a contribution that already exists or you're jumping in on the conversation, is you do get those new perspectives. So you see the piece of the puzzle that you didn't see before, as Rebecca mentioned, and it often just allows you to really sharpen your own skills and see things through fresh lens, which is a new way to apply things. And I feel like for me, that was 5 years ago, that was the reason I wanted to jump in. And it's totally changed my own work and the trajectory of it, just because of having a community of contributors to brainstorm with.
And this is Sam Knuth. I lead the product documentation team at Red Hat, along with some other functions. And if I think about why getting involved, for me, it's really around exploring topics that I'm passionate about. So if I think back like 20 years ago when I first started getting involved from a sort of open source project perspective, it was really around wanting to learn something and then just thinking, wow, this is really cool. How do I learn more about it? and then finding sort of a community and wanting to just explore the topic further. And now when it comes to the open organization and applying open source principles to other concepts outside of software, I find it's just a great way to dig in more deeply to a topic that you're interested in and connect with other people who are also interested in it and just share ideas and explore your own ideas more. So that's where I think that's what really drives me personally.
That's really interesting to have this many people in as part of the conversation, and I hear sort of different reasons motivating different folks. And for me, I'll just add it's even a little different. Like when I started getting involved in open source knowledge sharing projects, it was because I had a passion for open source and open principles and practices, but I'm not a programmer, right? So I would always look at projects, but come to a point where I could no longer participate or didn't feel like I had a home in that project because the project was requiring a lot of technical expertise, whether it be knowledge of a specific programming language or, development framework or whatever. But when I found that there were open projects that were, that could utilize my skills, which were much more about writing and editing, and as a an educator and somebody who's in academics, like a passion for helping others learn, I could use those spaces and my talents there to actually contribute the open source way, like following open source principles, using open source tools, helping other people understand. And I found a home for myself in open source communities in a way that I didn't initially think was possible. And so that's what keeps me motivated.
Yeah, it is interesting that I agreed as well, Bryan, having the different voices and perspectives. I also, because I took some notes of what I might want to say, and then I basically had to scratch them all because to a degree, everybody said something that was a version of that, right? Intrinsic motivations and that sort of thing. But instead, it got me to think while I was listening, just to flash on what my motivation, what got me to start, because I've been working alongside with people, and part of it was that I saw the way my mind works is I saw instantly you could apply these open source principles to all kinds of other endeavors, design, sewing patterns. Like there's no end of things that you can follow this method with. And to me as a writer, it was pretty straightforward to do that. And frankly, I had a book to write for Red Hat Enterprise Linux back in the day. And I wanted to work with the community on some of the material as much as I could so that and it helped me learn about SE Linux. It helped me learn about how to work with people. And even when I sat down and did that work, I had gained all these benefits we're all talking about here from my curiosity and from the knowledge sharing and from learning more from other people who were smarter, more experienced, diverse in thought than myself. So pretty good. Thanks. All right, well, I'll move on to the next question. We kind of touched upon it a little bit as well. We talked about motivations. So I want to see if anyone wants to expand a little bit on what motivates you, what motivates a person to contribute to an open knowledge sharing project.
And I'll take that one first. I think for me, so there's a big philosophical motivation for me, which is that I think we live in a really unique time in history where content and the creation of content has just been radically democratized. Like, with a computer, as long as you've got that, as long as you've got access to the internet, you can get your ideas out there in front of other people in a way that there aren't so many gatekeepers like there have been in the past. And so you can circumvent, your corporate hierarchy. You can share what you're thinking. You can share what you're working on. And there's more respect today and more public accountability today for also attribution of ideas. It's harder to steal somebody else's ideas and not credit them for it. And so, for anybody, I think, who has had a lot of good ideas, but not a lot of opportunities to be in this space in this moment, it's just really powerful. Like, granted, you've got to have the spare time to be able to do it. And for those of us with caregiving responsibilities and, trying to kill it in our day jobs, that's not always easy. But I don't know. I just think like, gosh, what my grandmother was, she was an early adopter of computers, and she was a secretary, and she didn't have a lot of career opening opportunities, and she did what she could where she was. But like, what would she do if she was here in time at my age with this ability to share what she knew. What could she have accomplished? So, I mean, I know the world's not perfect and nothing's solved yet in terms of a lot of big problems, but I don't know. To me, that's just a big piece of the philosophy, is like, it's right there in front of you and you see what people do with it. So like, grab it and do what you can.
Yeah, I would echo or build on that, Rebecca. I think, like, if I think back initially, I had this passion for learning something, but then very quickly I realized, oh, this could be a way into a career opportunity. And actually, I ended up coming to Red Hat through participating in the open source communities, and then ended up getting referred by somebody in one of those communities to a job opening at Red Hat. And if it isn't that direct, it can also help you get your name out there. And then I think outside from career development, I think also a motivation is just thought leadership. Like, it can really help you get yourself and your ideas out there as a thought leader on a topic, and expose you to a community there, and it could lead to conference speaking opportunities and all kinds of interesting things.
Absolutely, Sam. I think that's a continuing motivation for somebody like myself in that type of a role. But when you're working in a community, it adds like a different layer of credibility, if you will, to your work. Like we talked about having the accountability there, but you're also often have a more robust idea because you're pulling in from the other sources that already exist or that are supporting that material. And for me, I think it's a continuing motivation is to be able to have that measure of credibility because of the community that you work within. So it's like what Rebecca said, which I thought was great too, is you're like this point in time where we wouldn't be able to offer ideas quite like this at any other point in time, but to just not have that, but have the community support that really just solidifies the value of the work that you're contributing as well is a great thing.
Yeah, just echoing what everyone else has said, the opportunity to build your own personal brand and credibility around your own opinions, right, is huge. So, there's always the altruistic motivation of sharing your knowledge. It certainly is good for your career growth to be seen as an expert. But I also think there's great value in the opportunity to have a forum in which to share your opinionated stance on something. It may not be something that everyone agrees with, but I have perhaps strong opinions about how people should effectively communicate with one another in open source projects. And that is what motivated me to sit down and write a chapter, sharing knowledge about how to do this most effectively, just because I wanted to see people have better outcomes, right? So if you are strong and truly passionate about a particular idea and you would like to see people do things in a way that you have influenced because you have good ideas and you come with data and experience to back it up, you will find fertile ground in an open knowledge sharing project.
Yeah, and I think, I definitely agree with Rebecca's sentiment that opportunities for expression are really multiplied today. I mean, just in an explosive way. What's rarer still, I think, and what motivates me to participate to a community knowledge sharing project rather than just kind of spin up my own box and put my ideas out there is the qualities that Jen discussed earlier. It's that sort of the sharpening that I get from doing this with other people, right? Not just blogging about open principles or spinning up a blog and writing my own tutorials on communication, Leslie, in an open source project or something, which is certainly possible. But what I get from doing it with a group is that camaraderie, that sense of mission and purpose, that sense of having fellow travelers, and then improvements to my own work, right? Just people saying, hey, that's not really great. That's not right, or that doesn't jive with my experience, or can I add a paragraph to the end, right? Like that is extraordinarily valuable to me, and I think increasingly more so in an age when anybody can spin up anything and say anything. To have peers around you to help you is really valuable. So that's what motivates me to participate in a knowledge sharing community or project, is just to reap those benefits. Yes, I give up certain things, speed of publication, for example. I don't just type what I want and put it out there. If people review it, people look at it, they debate it with me, but I think the work is better in the end for having a community behind me.
I would add to that, they're in a good, healthy community that's got a good code of conduct and, keeps an eye on comments and things like that. There's also a certain amount of safety that you don't necessarily have if you're out on the internet putting your stuff out there to the world and just waiting for the YouTube comments to roll in, right? To Bryan's point, you have a little bit more freedom to make mistakes and not feel skewered for them publicly. You have more ability to learn from other people before you even put something out there. And I think especially if this is your first time trying to do something like that, or if you've tried in the past and you've been burned by something you put out there, it doesn't mean it was wrong necessarily. It just means, somebody really loud disagreed with you. I think joining a community like this can be a really good way to give that a try again and have a different outcome.
Oh, nice. That's a great point. That closed the thought on it for me. So just to end a riff a little bit off of what was like Sam's experience with career development, there's also an opposite direction that I think we have, where if you think about it, you may belong to one of these communities already and not actually know it, because knowledge sharing, with a group of people is something that's humans, right? We do that forever. And sometimes the opportunity is not to go and join a new community, but to teach your community to be more open and transparent and to follow some of these practices to gain these benefits. And then if it doesn't work out, in the process, you might find another community of like-minded people who are doing something similar that you can shift over to, who want to pursue things in an open source way. And another one that just jumped to my mind, which is not my story, but one that I just really love about is like fan fiction communities. Clearly people who are getting together to work on content to, you put your ideas out there in a safe environment where people comment on it and work on it and so forth. And the entire current generation of sci-fi, romance writers and so forth, many of them came up out of the fan fiction communities. So literally developed their craft with fellow craft practitioners and so forth. So it's in terms of being able to vision this as something that helps with your career and helps with your passions at the same time. The convergences are amazing, and because it's the open environment where you're rewarded for sharing, and more than just encouraged, but where the benefits really come from when you put something out there, so they can be built upon by other people instead of in isolation. That's really where the great stuff happen. So the question, I'll just repeat. Pardon me. So the question is, how would you suggest someone get started in an open source knowledge sharing community?
Is it too simple to just say get started? Well, I mean, because a lot of folks we've talked to that have approached some of the ambassadors in the Open Org project, and there's a lot of trepidation about actually what to do or how to start, or, they'll spend an inordinate amount of time over an article without actually releasing it because there's a lot of fear and trepidation behind that. But there is a measure of just finding the group that's the right place for you and getting started. And then I'll let everybody else say how to do that.
Yeah, I think that, to some degree, I think that is it. But I think there's also some practical things. Like, it does depend on what type of community we're talking about. And if you find a community that you're interested in, I think it's good to sort of observe for a little while, maybe read the code of conduct or read the community guidelines. And what you might notice is that there's actually instructions for the community that tell you how to get started. In a lot of cases, it might be as simple as send an email, sign up for this email list, and send an email with the subject line self-introduction, and explain who you are and what you're interested in. And then people welcome you and you start to share ideas about how to get involved. But I think it depends a little bit on the community, but if you're out there looking and you find something, just kind of check it out and poke around, or join the chat channel and just sort of ask. I think that can be very effective.
Yeah, riffing off of Sam's point, I think particularly if we're talking about folks who are in that position of not having worked in an open community before, so they are very nervous and uncomfortable in taking those first steps, like finding a community that actually has contribution guidelines and a set of steps spelled out for how you can get started is a really great place to get started because they have an understanding that new people are going to come in into their community, and they've actually set up a structure to take you in and to help you through that process. So if you're a little bit nervous, not diving, feet first into an unarticulated problem space is probably the right approach. And the other thing to look for is, depending upon the community that you're engaging with, several communities have a list of newcomer-friendly tasks. It may be, please edit this wiki page for typos or information that's out of date, right? And when you find communities that have those kind of getting started guidelines and lists of projects for new contributors, if you see something that you can do, just go do it. The worst thing you can do is make a mistake. Clearly, there was already a mistake, or there would not have been anything to get fixed. So just go ahead and fix it. And if it needs to get fixed again, that's great. It's all software. We can just keep fixing it.
To all of that great advice, I would add, don't be afraid to identify yourself as a newcomer. That's a really great thing to say, is this is my first time contributing. It's my first time posting. If you are communicating in a language that is not your native language, it's okay to say that. And it can be very helpful to people to say, hey, I'm not a native English speaker, so if anything in here is confusing, that's why, right? So just things that will help humanize you to the members of that community who maybe, you might catch on a day when they're a little grumpy, that's okay. And another thing is, if you're joining a community that doesn't have that mature approach to newcomers that Leslie and Jen and Sam were describing, if they don't have that, here's our how to get started, that actually can be a really helpful way as you find your way into the community. It could be a really fun early project, is to take those learnings and put them into hey, I created this, first draft of a getting started as a newcomer guide. Nothing turns you from newcomer to experienced person like creating a guide for other newcomers.
Well put. Some great advice all around. And everyone, I want to thank you for your time and your willingness to participate not only in the roundtable, but in the open source and open knowledge sharing projects of which you're a part. Thank you so much for your time. And to those of you watching at home, enjoy Red Hat Summit.
Thanks for having us. Cheers.
Okay. Thank you.